Hi, I'm Pavel, and today I will share with you how SaveChanges works and one common mistake I have seen. Before I go to code, I wish to share with you one real-life scenario which is quite similar to saving changes. You're about to go on vacation. You're waiting at the terminal with the rest of passengers until the bus comes, picks you up, drives you to the plane so you can take your seat, then the bus can take back to the terminal, check if there are more people, and if there are not, the plane can fly away. Now let me show you one piece of code and explanation how saving changes actually works in Enity Framework, so I can take that knowledge and adapt it to airport analogy. I have e-commerce system, which contains entities in DB context related to e-commerce like products, customers, orders, and reviews. Once a day I'm communicating with Google API and retrieving reviews from there. Using a loop, I'm going through each of those reviews and map them to my own entity, which I'm adding to DB context and calling SaveChanges. That means if there is 100 reviews, I'm calling SaveChanges 100 times. If I want to perform any modify operation with Enity Framework on my database, I actually have to take one of 3 operations and create a code for it with Enity Framework called SaveChanges, and it will result in a SQL script which is executed against SQL database. And that happened only because I called SaveChanges after all of those operations. Now if I were to split them to separate requests and after each of the operation I would call SaveChanges, I would get 3 separate SQL scripts executed against database. So how that plane analogy actually makes sense? Let's switch up a few things. Let's change plane for database, bus depot and inline bus for DB context and DB context factory, terminal for our application, and people inside of it to instructions like add, update, and delete. So having the code which I showed a moment ago in head, what we are actually going to do is perform that operation on an airport analogy. So take and create our DB context, take the instruction, add it to DB context, connect to a database, execute DB script by saving changes, and disconnect from database. So if that's my e-commerce system, I would have to connect and disconnect database 10 times until all my operations are done. Is that really the most efficient solution? Why don't treat our DB context exactly like bus on an airport and try to pack all people into it, so all instructions into it with one SaveChanges, save every item to a database like people were put to plane. So instead of calling SaveChanges every time I have added an item, I'm actually going to call it after I've added all items in a loop. To validate my idea, I have created a benchmark which is going to add few amounts of items to database and see which of the solutions performs faster. Here is the result styled with HTML formatter, and I can clearly see a gigantic difference in ratio between the rank and correct solutions, so that gives me a conclusion that I should always use saving changes after I've added all items. Which is stupid and not true. If there is million instructions to add, there is a possibility that the database would not handle that, and adding those items would take ages for me, like you can see here. I also will go the same flow, disconnect from DB and dispose, but the whole adding instructions part would be much longer than I would expect it to. This is rare case for me that I have to add like 300,000 items, but it happens, for example, when I'm seeding database for some testing. And in those cases, I actually follows Slowma answer from Stack Overflow, which visualized look like that. And if you have one DB context, the answer is quite simple. The more items we have in SaveChanges, the less time it takes. But if we try to add all 5,600,000 items in one SaveChanges, actually it will throw out of memory exception. So for those scenarios, I'm recreating a DB context, so disposing instance and creating a new one. And from experience, if I have like 2 million items, I actually do it every 5,000 items, and it never caused any problems for me. Modifying DB context configuration, especially property auto detect changes enabled and setting it to false, will also make a gigantic difference in terms of the time of upload and saving changes. Normally when Enity Framework is tracking objects, it's calling detect changes method to see what exactly has been changed in that particular entity. And with that disabled, it's actually not called on every operation like add, update, and remove. It takes a lot of load from Enity Frameworks in terms of memory, so the speed. Thanks for watching, I hope you enjoyed it. If you have any feedback, thoughts, idea about future videos, just let me know in a comment. I will answer to all of them. Cheers!